favorite speaker, Dr. V.N. Mahalakshmi ma'am, Dean HP AVMC, on selecting appropriate research designs for your research questions. I'm over to you.
Yeah, thanks, James. Actually, I'm not going to talk much about how you would do the statistical thing, how you will do the administrative part of the trial and all. Most of the times when we see clinical research, right, or research, we find that how bad it is designed or how it can become much better. So that is the thing what we do. So as a clinician, as a practicing physician, or how would you choose an appropriate study design? So that is what is I'm going to explore in this session. And this is a very famous quote, right? I think Dean also quoted this. The most problems what we see in studies is not because their theory is not correct or their analysis is not correct or the statistical methods they have used is inappropriate. It is mainly because of poor design. So that is the premise on which we will start. So this is going to be the session outline. I would like to discuss about these things. What are the considerations before you choose an appropriate study design? And how do you match the study design to what research question you have? What factors, other factors you need to keep into consideration before you choose the study design? One is the hierarchy of evidence that I think almost all the speakers have talked to you yesterday. So I'm just going to context it only to matching the study design. And most important, and which has not been touched upon, is what is the outcome that we are studying, or what is the outcome which is being tested in the research project. So that is the thing which is going to do this. And let us see if we can come up with a reasonable heuristics or an algorithmic approach which we can apply in real practice. So this is going to be this. And there will be some interactions in these studies in this presentation. So, and anytime you feel that what I'm speaking is jargon, you can always interrupt me and ask me to clarify or repeat. So this is the plan for the session. And this is one of very famous quotes, right? What Voltaire, no, the author of French Revolution, he keeps saying, the best should not become the enemy for the good. Okay, so this is nowhere more apparent, especially in designing dilemma in research studies. So is this the ideal design for my research question? That is one we have to think of. We have to balance this against other factors. One is the feasibility factor, right? It takes into account many factors. What makes the study feasible? What is my capacity, right? We talk about capacity both in terms of organizing, mobilizing resources, and also previous experiences and uh, use of other study designs or experimental things. So what is our own capacity? What material we have available for doing the research? So it might be in the form of patients, okay, or it might be in the form of topics also. So topics which can be used in our current context. So that is the second factor. And what are the resources which are at our disposal? What is the resources which are available? And to me, what are the resources which are available in my department, in my institution, or across institutions? And how much effort we are willing to put in to ensure that we are doing this. If we design studies only to say that whatever is available in my unit, I will do, then probably we will not be able to come up with much better questions. We need to actually contextualize to at least at institution, no? Like suppose molecular biology lab is available, and what Ravi spoke, no, we have cell culture lines available. At least am I harnessing what is available in the institution? Is there an expertise which is available in the institution which you can use? So these are the kind of questions what we ask ourselves. So what is the ideal design, and we'll match it with what is feasible to do under our circumstances. But feasibility we need to look into at with a little broader mind. Okay, so I would say that research resources which are available in the institute at least needs to be looked at, if not at the university level or at a broader setting. Now let us look at the research design. Why this is coming? Okay. Okay. So what exactly do we mean by the term research design? Research design is nothing but the specific methods or procedures that are used to answer a research question, right? It is nothing but a plan or strategy, how you will go. Plan is what is an overall plan, how you are going to, when you are going to start, when you are going to finish. Strategy is how do I go about collecting this data, whom to include, whom not to include, right? And it is nothing but a blueprint that will guide the entire research process. You can't keep changing the research design or research methodology once you start doing the study, right? Unless you find that there is a major flaw in correct in carrying out the research. In that case, you need to go back and then re-look at the blueprint or the plan, and you need to take re-permission from the governing bodies, no IRC or IEC, because if you're changing the study design, you need to ensure that the new design again complies with what is the regulations. So before you do, this is what Alice keeps asking, no, where should I go? And the Cheshire cat will reply, where do you want to go? So if you don't know where you are going, any road will take you. So unless you have a proper study design, then you would not be in a position to carry out your study well. So that is, it's like a GPS marker for where you want to go. Okay. And a little bit more, we'll talk about what is evidence in science. This is a very famous quote by Thomas Huxley. No, it is nothing but common sense, and you need most of the times we can come up with fantastic theories, but the theory is killed by ugly facts. I can think of one very nice study which was done by the Cambridge University. So what they thought was to learn English language, instead of learning the normally they learn letters, they learn phonetics, then they learn how to form words and do. So instead of teaching this way, can we teach whole language approach? Something like that they started. And they started teaching children straight away words instead of teaching them phonetics or alphabets, and see if they made a difference. And actually the study showed that it actually worked much worse, but the theory of it was very nice. You learn holistically, you learn to look at the language as a whole. So most of the times it's the theory part of it is very beautiful, but what we need is ugly facts to substantiate the theory. So our job as researchers is to draw conclusions based on the ugly fact. It is not only researchers who draw the conclusion, it is the public who consume. It is also the other people who are going to look at our research. They also have to base their conclusions based on our facts, not based on how fantastic our theory looks on paper. So this is another very famous example. Okay, in 1970s, anybody who was found to have, when the angiograms became popular, anybody who was found to have any block in the coronary vessels, irrespective of one vessel, two vessel, three vessel, anything, everybody was offered CABG. And the number of CABGs which were being done was phenomenally higher compared to medical therapy, which was actually poo-pooed. And they said, no, no, this is the only treatment. And then, until that time that the Lancet trial came up and said that we have looked at the CABG versus medical therapy, that famous landmark trial. And then they said it is works only in two conditions, only when you have a triple vessel disease or left anterior descending coronary artery disease. Till such time, there was absolutely no evidence, and the fad was to undergo CABG. So this is what it is. So evidence in science, no, is very nice. You have a block, you think that you would go and bypass the block and improve the circulation. You think that you would improve the outcomes of the particular disease. So in theory, looks very nice, but the facts do not support. So that is what searching for evidence in science is all about. So what are the main considerations before we choose a study design? The first one is, as this is a very nice book on philosophy, no? That it is the question that matters. Most of the times when we start as young physicians, no, all the time we keep thinking about what is the answer to that particular problem. No, if you see a patient problem, you keep looking at what is the answer for that particular problem. At some time, no, we switch over and we start asking what is the actual question to be asked, right? Is there a relationship between learning whole language, or are the children learning whole language do much better than learning phonetics? Is the thing. But instead of that, we can ask question like what makes the children learn? So it's the question which matters rather than answer at some point of time. The other thing which matters is what is the outcome that we are looking at, especially in clinical studies, trials, and other patient related ones. What exactly is that we are looking at? What are we going to achieve by doing this study? Because all studies, they talk effort, they take money, they take a lot more out of us, right? So is it really worth it? And what is that I'm looking, right? And what is the kind of evidence I'm want to produce? Because we keep talking about, like, if I make this study and then publish it, how likely is somebody going to look at my evidence and say, yes, Dr. Mahalakshmi has already studied this, so I can take that as a baseline, or I can take that as a stepping stone and further build upon this concept, or I can use this in my current practice. So that is what is the next questions we need to ask. So what is the research question? What is the outcomes we are studying, and what is the evidence we are looking at? These are the three things we need to consider predominantly when we try to do a study design. So let's go back to this thing. We'll look at the research question. Okay. Dr. Bhatt had done very nicely yesterday, the day before, and sir was talking about the finer aspects of doing the research questions. Let's explore a little bit more about this and see what it is. So the research question is that we are going to, in a research, we are going to ask a very specific question, right? Like, by giving zinc, are we going to reduce the incidence of death in children with chronic diarrhea? Something like that is a very specific question. You define who is the population, you define what is the intervention, and then you see what you're trying to propose, right? Sometimes the questions can be very broad. What are the factors affecting the outcome of neonate? It's a very large or broad question. So then we can break it down into smaller questions. Does booking of the mother, status of the mother, affect the outcome in the newborn? Okay, does the birth weight of the newborn affect its outcome, that survival or the thing? So we can actually take broad questions and then break it down into much smaller questions so that it is easier to find the answers in that. So all the time we keep thinking about talking about research questions more than research hypothesis, because you want to find out the answer. So when it is stated in the form of a question, then it stimulates us to start thinking about and how we can go about finding an answer, right? So we can actually test a specific assumption or hypothesis. That is what the research question does. An ugly research question is like a fishing expedition. No, poor man goes and he puts at least 20 different fishing poles, and he is waiting for something to come and bite. So if something bites, then he will take it, right? What we call as data dredging. You look at, okay, let's look at our incidence of, we look at all our hernias and see if we can find something out of it. Okay, from study, look at all our routine clinical records and then see if we can get something out of it. Or most annoying is that you are looking at a question which matters to nobody, even to you. You are worried only because you want to have a publication. Okay, that is necessary evil. But if you are going to spend 6 months, 1 year, 2 more years of your study trying to answer a particular question, let it better matter to you, right? That too is what it is. Then it becomes like a very joyous expedition rather than trying to become bogged down by research. I think that is where the mentality comes down. So the question should make a difference to you. At least will it change my practice, clinical practice? I don't want to do it this way. I want to change over, or I would continue to do because my evidence supports this. So that is what this research question is all about. You need to have a question which matters to you, right? And not like a fishing expedition. So what's the significance of asking a good research question? It's the focus or the specificity. So you look at a broad area, you narrow down the area into which is not very clear, and then raise the focused research question. So you're worried about neonatal outcomes. You're worried about especially neonatal outcomes in prematurity. And then you ask a question, is the zinc level associated with decreased immunity in preterm infants, which will affect the outcomes of their newborn? So in that case, so you narrow down from very broad base into much more specific or focused one. So that is the significance of a good research question. Dr. Bhatt told us about the finer aspects. Okay, finer was a mnemonic he used. So there's another mnemonic which is used, which is called as the PICOTS, right? What is the problem, or who are the patients whom we are worried about, right? What is the intervention or the exposure we are talking about? Is this a comparison group, or it is only one group we are looking at? What is the outcome or the end point we are looking at? What is the type of question we are asking? And what is the optimal study design to answer these questions? So we need to walk through PICOTS to ensure that we choose the most appropriate answer for our research question. So who is the patient, or what is the problem? What is the intervention or exposure we are talking about? What is the comparison group? What's the end point we are looking at? What's the type of question? And what is the study design optimal? So that is what is this. And there is a big link between the research design and the outcome. No, it's like getting married. You can get married in many ways. No, it can be marriage of choice, marriage of arrangement, etc., etc. But you can get married like under most circumstances only once. So it is like that. So it can be answered by many research. Each question can be answered by many different types of research study designs. All of them have their own advantage or disadvantage. However, okay, in any practice, you have place for all types of research designs. No, yesterday we had almost a big thing saying that which is better. Is it a cross-sectional study or a case control study or research randomized control trial? Everybody was coming and pitching. Okay, the elevator pitch. This is the best one you should go for, and all that. All the type of studies have their own place in clinical research, but not all designs are possible for a particular study or a particular type of study. So that is what we need to keep in mind. So you will have to select one appropriate one. What works for you is what you need to select. So this is the three types of questions we ask. That is what it is. It's an exploratory question. What if? Okay. What if learning whole language makes the students, makes the children much better language centered? Okay. What if I improve the immunity levels of newborns by giving zinc? What happens? What if overweight people are more prone to CABG? So you don't know anything about it and you don't have a definitive answer. So what you do is you want to see if there is a scope for further research. So that is what if questions are all about. Is there any kind of link or association? Is it worth exploring that? That is what exploratory questions. Then you see, okay, maybe there is something there. In that case, you want to describe what is the associations, how a set of variables are related to a group of individuals. That is what is descriptive questions. What is the relationship between uh, serum zinc levels and the immunity and the neonatal outcomes? So that is a descriptive type of question. Or how measuring serum zinc levels is going to tell us about the outcomes in the newborn. So this is a descriptive type of question. Descriptive questions can't really comment about what is the nature of relationship. It can only tell you that there is something going on, right? But it is not really clear on how strong or how bad is the relationship. For that, you need to ask relational question. Does giving zinc supplementation reduce mortality in premature patients? Or is the level substituting this drug going to control blood pressure much better? Or doing CABG is going to improve the outcomes in patients with coronary artery disease? So here you are talking about what is the explanation between the relationship between variables. It can be in the form of causal. You can say, does smoking cause lung cancer? That's a causal type of relational question, right? Or what is the description? How much changing from one drug to another is going to affect the outcomes in a patient with hypertension or coronary artery disease, etc., etc. So you can try and explore by asking what if there is some connection between them, and then you can go into more definitive what exactly is the relationship or how these two things are related, and then you would say relational questions. How bad or how strong is the relationship between these two variables? So these are the three types of research questions. So how do you create a study using ugly facts? What I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through different research methods using two things. One is I am very interested in trying to study what is the role of postmenopausal hormone replacement therapy. That's what I'm calling as an exposure to the development of uterine endometrial carcinoma. That is the outcome. For the sake of discussion now, let us assume that we have no idea about these things. There is not much of evidence in the literature. Okay. So if there is nothing whatsoever in this, I'm coming across one case. This endometrial carcinoma, one stage 4 lady presents to me, and I'm seeing this and I see that she has been taking hormone replacement therapy for last 20 years. So something goes off in my mind and saying, why this is a rare case of endometrial carcinoma in a patient who has been receiving HRT. So I report like that, right? It's an observation. It's a descriptive type of study, right? Okay, I did one case. Now I'm seeing continuously 5 women presenting to me in a span of 6 months. All of them had received, have endometrial carcinoma, and all of them had received HRT. So I present it in the form of a case series. So it can be fine. Now that my curiosity is totally piqued, so I want to know what exactly is going on between these things. So I'm going to pull out all the records of patients with endometrial carcinoma in our hospital, and I'm going to pour over the records and see how many of them had received that. Okay, that is review of clinical records. So I can do all these things. These are nothing but just observations, and they are descriptive kind of. There is no analysis, there is no data points. It is just going to tell us that there is something going on between these two. So there's nothing very definitive, but it is useful to tell you that further studies can be done in that area, right? To confirm or refute what statement information you have gained from this descriptive study. So that is the what if kind of questions. What if use of hormonal replacement therapy is associated with endometrial carcinoma? So that's the kind of question we are trying to answer in that. Okay, now that we have done, we know that something is going on. Okay, there is some relationship that seems to be some kind of an association with this. So what we can do is you can try and substantiate, trying to find out how strong or how bad it is the association. So you can go for observational analytical studies. There are various ways of doing this. So you take patients today, right? Today you are having patients, participants, etc., etc. So I'm going to do what is called as a cross-sectional study design. Okay, I'm measuring at one point of time. I'm going to take a population of all the postmenopausal women who are admitted in the hospital. Okay, over 1 year period. And then I'm going to see how many of them have endometrial carcinoma. Okay, and that will become my cases. How many of them don't have endometrial carcinoma? That is my control cases. And in these two groups, I'm going to say how many of them had the exposure, that is hormone replacement therapy, and how many they did not have. Okay, so this is the cross-sectional study we are going to talk about, or the snapshot study. So the question here is, how common is HRT usage in women, postmenopausal women with endometrial carcinoma? So that is the kind of research question what we are asking about. So, okay, this can be done very rapidly. It gives much more evidence. We saw that yesterday. So the next one is we are going to ask one more question. Now that we know that something is association, and our cross-sectional study has shown that maybe there is more women who have developed carcinoma in the people who are taking HRT group. So how do we confirm that suspicion, so that we have got some data point which is showing these things? So can we actually confirm that? So that is what we will go for a case control design. Okay, patients who have endometrial carcinoma will be taken as cases, and group of women with similar characteristics but they don't have endometrial carcinoma can be taken as control. So then we will try and study what is in the control group, what is the amount of exposure, what is the amount of exposure in the case group. So this is the case control. Okay, today you have patients who have got, okay, we are going to look at the cases, controls, and look at the thing. We call this as a retrospective model. It is retrospective because the outcome has already occurred. Then you are going back in time to see if there has been an exposure. So the process of data collection is not prospective or retrospective. It is the design. It is the relationship between the outcome and the exposure which determines whether it is prospective or retrospective. See, many times we find that people call, if you have taking from historical records. We call this as retrospective trial, and when we actually collect data prospectively, we call this as prospective. So that is not the correct way to do. So this can be done quite fast, and the two groups, still the problem is you can actually put on controls. Only you think that this is the only control. No, you have people who have received HRT and people who have not received HRT. But there may be other variables. No, there can be incidence of let's say increased number of ovarian cycles. So that can also be a risk factor for endometrial carcinoma. So those are the kind of factors usually you cannot be controlling. So that is the major problem in case control design. You can answer these questions as how are. How are it is also a type of things. You can do it in a longitudinal fashion. You can either do it in prospective fashion or retrospective fashion. You take the cohort group, right? One group which is receiving hormonal replacement therapy, another group which is not receiving therapy. You follow them up for any period of time and find out how many of them end up developing endometrial carcinoma. So today you go back and go to future. See people who have exposure who develop the disease and people without exposure who develop the disease. Okay. Oh, I think there is some problem in this thing. That this is sorry, this right side is not correct. Okay, that is a copy paste error. So you can actually have multiple measurements over a period of time, and this gives you a much more authentic data compared to what you got in the case control study. You can also do what is called as a retrospective cohort study. What you would do is you would take a registry of patients. Let us say that I want to find out how many people exposed to that radiation during the Chernobyl accident developed carcinoma of thyroid. So we can actually take the cohort of people who were exposed much, much before. You have a historical database. From that, today I can measure how many of them have done. So it is actually the design wise, it is same. It is not that you take the cohort now and follow them up in future. You take the cohort from past and then follow them to the present. That is the difference between prospective and retrospective cohort studies. It is only for specific groups, not for others. So if you see the observational designs, you take today and then you take a cross section, that is the cross sectional study. One slice of population today is your cross sectional study. The outcome has occurred. You want to go back and study the exposure. It is a retrospective study. That is a case control. You are actually taking a group, looking at the exposure and see if the disease is developing. That is a cohort type of study. So that is the three types of observational study design. Then comes the question of does. Okay, that is where we are going to go in for experimental or interventional study. Does giving HRT increase the risk of endometrial carcinoma, or use of hormone replacement therapy in postmenopausal women associated with increased incidence of endometrial carcinoma? So that becomes your research question. Okay, so you would try and get more answers, more specific answer. Is it because of this or is it because of some other factors? That's what you want to do. So you're going to take a group of people, that is postmenopausal women. They are randomly selected from a population, and you are going to assign them to a group which will receive hormone replacement and a group which will not receive. It will receive a placebo, right? When you say randomization, the patient has an equal chance of getting into either limb of the study. Okay, so I don't know whether I'm receiving Covaxin or I'm receiving distilled water. So that is what happens in RCTs. And both groups I'm going to follow up to see how many of them are going to develop endometrial carcinoma. So this is what it is. So you're going to start participants, you will randomize them. Then you would put experimental therapy versus standard therapy and see what is the outcomes that is going to happen. So if it is conducted very well, then it will provide most definitive answers. Actually, there is no other trial which is going to give you causative answers. No, is this the cause for that? That is going to come only from these type of studies. But however, there can be a lot of ethical issues. No, suppose if radiation is causing cancer, you want to find. Obviously, you cannot expose somebody to radiation to see if this is happening in that. In that case, RCT is not possible. Additional difficulties is sometimes if your outcome is very low or incidence is very rare, then you will not be able to get a adequate sample size and longer follow-up period, right? Follow these things. So in that case, you can go for what is called as non-randomized design. That is, the patients will be there instead of random allocation. Okay, the patients will choose to undergo either of the treatment, the standard treatment or the experimental treatment, which will be much easier. So in our case, the women choose whether she is going to receive hormone replacement therapy or she's not going to receive. Okay, then you can do. The only difference is this randomization will not be there. So the only problem is, again, the groups may not be similar. There can be some other factors which can be there. So in case you can't do a randomized control trial, non-randomized design is also acceptable in certain situations. So that is all about the research question. So what is your research question? So as we said, same clinical problem, HRT with endometrial carcinoma. You can ask the question in different ways. So it is the question which is going to select what is the type of study. Next one is we are going to look at what are the outcomes we are looking at. Okay, there are actually two things. Any of you who have done that Coursera course with Perry Mason, where Perry Wilson, he's in Yale University and he is a nephrologist. He keeps talking about why your Facebook friend is wrong and how you can actually interpret scientific studies. It's a wonderful course, and those of you who have not taken, I strongly suggest that you go and look at that course and see if it is going to make that will actually make a lot of difference in how you understand studies, right? So we are going to look at outcomes. In outcomes in all clinical studies can be only two different types. There's something called as hard outcomes, right? And there's something called as soft outcomes. Hard outcomes, essentially speaking, are only two. It can either influence death or it can influence birth, right? So if you're going to look at fertility and studies related to that, so birth can be a hard outcome. So that is what ultimately matters. Or if you're going to look at any other disease process, treatment, interventions, etc., etc., death can be a hard outcome. Rest of it are all soft outcomes, what we are going to do. But these are the acceptable outcomes. Okay, if death is a bad outcome, if it is untimely, right? Not because if he is 80 years old and he is dying, that is not the thing. So death is something which is investigator reported. So it is much more an objective measure of what is an outcome. The second set of outcomes you can do is disease. So it can be either a set of symptoms, you can put a scoring system for particular disease, you can put the physical signs, you can put laboratory abnormalities, you can put a mash of all these things. Okay, so you can call this as a, again, you can, it is investigated reported. So disease can be another outcome which you can measure in your studies. So did it result in this particular disease? Is my voice breaking?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
It's okay.
Messages come. So the second one is the disease. So you looked at death as a hard outcome. Then the next acceptable one, if you're not looking at death, okay, because you don't want death to happen many a times. So you're going to look at whether the disease itself presentation is going to change, any occurrence of disease, etc., etc. So what is the incidence of fungal sepsis, bloodstream in prematurity? So that you are looking at a disease. The third one is discomfort. Okay, this is what are the symptoms. This is actually the participants are going to say, I underwent hernia repair, I am having pain, I have a radiating pain. Okay, so this is a discomfort which is reported by this. So this is what many a times we try and see, but it is participant reported. So you need to make this into more objective scores, right? It cannot be like, for me, pain in a very small amount itself might be very significant. For somebody who is actually a soldier, his pain threshold must be much more. So this, if you want to measure these kind of discomforts, you need to have some kind of a rating scale so that you will have an objective measurement of these symptoms. Okay, so this is also participant reported. It is not investigator reported. You can't actually see it or measure it, right? It is somebody who is reporting it. The next one is disability. Well, this is also participant reported. Disability is inability to go about usual activities at work or at recreation, etc., etc. So I'm having difficulty in moving my limb. I'm having problems because I'm unable to stretch this leg fully. So those kind of things. So any kind of impairment, what you are going to study is there. So this is also participant reported. You need to have some kind of make it into some kind of an objective measure, right? You can't just say that 10 of our patients after surgery reported discomfort in walking. So that doesn't make any sense. So you have to convert it into a measurable parameter. Then comes dissatisfaction, right? The emotional reaction to disease and its care. Okay, this is also participant reported. We found that the quality of life is got affected because I underwent this surgical procedure compared to what I was before. It did not make any symptom, any improvement whether I had a sinus surgery or not after I have undergone this. So you can actually find out whether the patient was okay with the uh, treatment what was given or the care which was given or this. So basically these 5 things, 5Ds is what you're going to measure. You're going to measure the death, you're going to measure the disease. These 2 things are objectively measured, so they actually carry much more weightage. Or you are going to measure discomfort, disability, or dissatisfaction, which are all going to be patient or participant reported. So you need to think about how to do. So what type of study you choose is also dependent on what is the kind of outcome you're looking at. Okay, keep that in the back of your mind because we need to tap that information later on when we go. Then comes what constitutes the best evidence, right? We have seen this pyramid any number of times yesterday. So I'm not going to tell what constitutes the best evidence. I'm not going to go through this. Only thing is, see, like for example, I'm sorry. Okay, yeah, this is what it is. So, like for example, hey, it is moving. Okay. I might want to do some kind of a randomized control trial because I want to see which of the surgical procedures is working out very well. Maybe it is not possible because I don't have a robotic surgery. I want to compare conventional surgery versus laparoscopic surgery versus robotic surgery for, let us say, cholecystitis. Okay. I may not be able to do it because it's not feasible in my institute. We don't have a robotic surgery. Sometimes it is not ethical, like what we saw, no? Radiation causes cancer. It may not be ethical to randomize people to receive radiation to see if it is going to happen or not. So in that case, you will have to select a more appropriate design. So the research question determines what type of study you do. That is the most important factor we have to keep in mind, but also the feasibility of doing and ethics of it. So that is what it is. So as much as possible, if your research design, if it is possible to do both cross-sectional study and a cohort study, so better go for a cohort study. So what constitutes best evidence, which can be done within the constraints of your place. So if you can write one case report versus you can do a cross-sectional study, that better to do actually a cross-sectional study than to just write one single case report. That is what it means. So now let us see if we can actually do an algorithm for that. So we are actually looking at 2 things. What is the time frame in which you are planning to do the study? Is it a very short time frame or it's going to be a long time frame, right? So in the short time frame, what is that outcome which you are looking at? Is it a rare outcome or is it a very fairly common outcome? Like anemia in children is a very common outcome, right? Whereas Menkes kinking hair syndrome in children is a very, very rare outcome. You don't get to see that often. So if you are looking at a short duration, you are looking at an outcome which is relatively rare. Okay, a case report or a case series is fine, right? I have one case report about splenogonadal fusion. So in the testis to spleen, there was one band of tissue which was found, right? Only some 4 cases have been reported. So if you have a very short duration and you have a very rare presentation of a disease, then you can go for a case report. If possible, go for a case series, which is much better. Why? Because you because your one is you don't have time frame for performing a randomized control trial. The other one is there may be ethical issues sometimes which can occur because of conducting RCTs. So that is the thing. Let us see what happens if you want to do a short study. I want to finish it in my 2 years of PG course, right? I want to do it before I become associate professor or professor. So your duration is fixed 2 years or 1 year kind of thing. But you can look at some frequent occurrences of, right? It may not be death as in the case of COVID. It may be disease as we are seeing now. It can be because of disability, discomfort, dissatisfaction, which are fairly common outcomes which you can see. So short duration, frequent occurrence of outcomes, then an RCT is a preferred mode of studying that, right? You have enough number of cases. You want to study about interventions of anemia in children, then don't do things like case control study. You can actually try and do a randomized control trial. That is what it means. Or you can do CCT if you cannot actually randomize because there are ethical issues. Obviously, you want to compare between surgery and no surgery or things like that. In that case, what we can do is control clinical trial. Okay, it may not be randomization. You can allow the patient to choose. So non-randomized control trials can also be used, or you can do before-after studies. Before this intervention, how was it, and after intervention, how was it? So these two types are included under that CCT. Okay. So if your outcome is frequent, RCT is the best choice, especially if you're looking at death, disease, and discomfort. Okay, if these are the three things what you're going to look at, then you need to go for an RCT. So you have a definite short duration of thing. You have frequent occurrences of outcomes, and this outcome you are trying to study whether it is death or discomfort or disease, then better to go for an RCT. And if RCT is not possible, any kind of controlled clinical trial is fine. Okay, that is the first part. Suppose you are a researcher, you got funding from DBT, DST, and all that. You can do it for a little longer duration of time. Time is not a constraint, right? And you want to do really good work where you want to do, like the fellows in Framingham who've been going on for last 75 years. So you have a long duration of study. Then you have an occurrence which is quite rare. Okay, you are looking at some kind of an outcome which is not very frequent. So what can you do? You can do RCT, but you'll have to remember that RCT is going to cost a lot of money for trying to do a very rare outcome. So that's not the ideal choice. So what if I go from left to right? That means that this is not very good. You can do a cohort study, which is a very good type of study. Even if it is very rare outcome, you will be able to pick up in a cohort. So Framingham study not only looked at it as allegedly it started with trying to find out what are the risk factors for CAD, but coronary artery disease. But as it has picked up so many other outcomes along the way. So if it is going to look at something of a little rare outcome, your cohort study and trying to look at things over a period of time is a better choice. You can do a case control study because it is easier to find cases. You can try and get more controls. And as Dr. Nishat said yesterday, so you need not go in for 1:1 case and control. You can go in for one case, you can even recruit 2 or 3 controls. So you would be able to get. If you are not able to do anything, at least report it as a case series. You can get a outcomes in 5 patients, 10 patients, etc., etc., or a case report. A registry analysis, no, looking at cancer registry or pain registry or people who have undergone knee replacement registry, etc., etc., and trying to see if there is a particular type of nerve compression which is occurring in patients who have undergone knee replacement surgery. So that might also be a worthwhile thing to do. So if you have a time available and your outcomes are not very frequent, you can use all these things. So RCT, if you're going to study death and disease in a rare condition, then the cost of doing an RCT is going to be very high. That is what you need to keep in mind. However, if you have a frequent occurrence, okay, and you have time available, then the best way to go for is RCT, and if not, any kind of controlled clinical trial. And RCT is really the best for all outcomes in these conditions, right? Whether you're studying death, disease, discomfort, disability, or dissatisfaction, RCT is the best one. So the first and foremost question is, what is the time duration we are looking at? What is the outcome we are looking at, and how frequent or rare is the outcome, and what is the feasibility of doing research design, and which one will give us higher hierarchy of evidence, taking into account what all we have put, the practical considerations while doing this study. Okay, now I'm going to ask questions and I want you to put the answers in the chat box, right? So you have some message has come. Okay, yeah, I'll finish in 1 minute. Okay, so you have a 38-year-old woman who is presenting in the emergency department and you want to do an endoscopy for him to rule out a esophageal varices. Okay, somebody suggested to you recently that there is the capsule endoscopy is a good method. It reduces patient discomfort. So if you are a logical person, okay, what type of study would you do to find out which of this is better? Is it conventional endoscopy versus capsule endoscopy? So what is the type of study design we are going to look at? Can we have answers in the chat box? Okay, case control. Yeah, case control will give you answers in a very short duration of time, right? Okay, Aarti also wants to do case control. Can you do an RCT in this case? Sujarita wants to do an RCT. You can do an RCT, but only thing is it's because it is a very frequent occurrence, you are going to get patients with endoscopy. But what is that you're going to look at? You're only going to look at discomfort, okay? Discomfort of having an open endoscopy versus discomfort of having a capsule endoscopy. So it's not, outcome is not balancing enough for you to go for the cost of RCT. Cost of RCT is not only that of material cost, it is also in the cost of time available and also human resources available. So you would probably stick to a case control to find out if this is a good one. Okay. And this is another one that is, you recall a conversation that people who are good in anatomy tend to become radiologists. So if you want to explore this, any truth in this observation, so what type of study is most suited to address this kind of hypothesis? Is this case control? I don't know whether it is because of, for this question, is it answering? So you want to find out if people who are good in anatomy tend to take up radiology as career. So what is the kind of study which will answer this question? Okay, cohort. CB, what type of cohort?
Yes, ma'am.
You can do a prospective cohort. That means you can take all the first year students
Yes.
now, and 10 years down the line, you see how many of them became radiologists. But if you are smart enough, you can do a retrospective cohort also. You can take 10 years back batch and see how many of them turned out to be radiologists and how many of them got distinctions in anatomy. You can do that. A retrospective cohort also is a very good way to answer this. Okay, thank you. Thank you for answering this. So if I were to take home, these are the things. Okay, research design is a function of question. It is not because of choice. And if you want to get an unbiased results, you need to ensure that you match the study design to your research question. And the factors, other factors to consider include what is the time frame available, and most importantly, what is the kind of outcomes we are looking at. Thank you very much for your patient listening. I can take questions. Sorry if I had exceeded time.
The session is
Did it
now
make sense what I said?
Yes, ma'am, a lot.
No, I try to look at it from a simple point of clinician's point of view on how you can put things under perspectives. That is what I try to do.
The session is now open for questions.
Just I want to make an observation. A very good talk from Dr. Mahalakshmi. I'm not surprised about it. But just I want to knit 2-3 talks which we had had in the last 2-3 days. In the beginning, Dean made a mention that research has become a business. If you take it in the right spirit, yes, I mean, human psychology is like that you want a return on investment on whatever you have made. To that extent, it has become a business. And especially when we are working in a private organization, your resources, whether it is time, human or financial resources are limited. So the research question is choosing the appropriate research topic or research question is extremely important. And this is where I would say there are two types of researchers. I mean, with my experience, I would say that there are some people who think that with these resources, whether in terms of time, money, or human resources, I want to get maximum results or maximum visibility or contribute to a bigger this thing, because the problem which we choose is of that type. Where there are certain questions, certain things which are directed research. For example, in atomic energy, there are certain things. Lot of thing has been done, but some portion of it is still unanswered. So for that, we spend a lot of time and money to find that a small delta. So in that case, well, you have to do because the situation demanded that. But being an academic institute, such sort of compulsions are not there. So it is always better to do the state of the art problem, which brings a bigger visibility, bigger impact on to the science and technology. That obviously requires a good amount of literature survey, proper research question choosing, and proper hypothesis and proper research design. And I hope these talks will get translated into our seed money proposals, and people do choose appropriate things with the limited resources which we are giving. We should be able to make a bigger impact on our outcome. So choosing the research question is very, very important.
Thank you, sir. There is one question from Arun Daniel. What is the scope of funding for long-term studies? Is it easier to get funding for short-term studies? I do not know whether it is easier to get funding for short-term studies versus funding for long-term studies. But only thing I know is that really studies which matter. Long-term studies actually have got a lot more funding, right? You take breast cancer, that control trial, which is going on, started by Barry Richards in the 1980s, but still it is going on, no, breast and colon cancer study, or the Framingham studies, and so many of these kind of studies which are going on for much longer time. Maybe Bhatt sir will answer that question.
See,
Is it
more
easier
than
to get funding?
the durations, it is a question we are asking. Suppose an important question which need to be answered by many people, then funding will definitely come. So how people are looking at your question is most important. In the sense, you put the right question, you will get the money. I think we have exceeded the time, so
Yes,
that I think we should go to the next speaker now. We are half an hour delay.
Yes. Without wasting